Hi, Valeria. Welcome to the
Uh,
FINITE Podcast.
Hi, nice to be here.
It's great to have you here. I'm really interested in the topic that we're going to discuss today. I actually want to tell the listeners how we met. We met at a
Yeah,
networking event and we
yeah,
actually added each other on LinkedIn and something came of it, which is
yeah. I love when that happens. It's like sweet serendipity. Imagine that
exactly.
networking can work.
Exactly. And we didn't talk that long. I guess the thing that grabbed my attention from our chat was when you said, yep, I met this company called Rizing, and we've actually just completed our sixth acquisition in 6
Yeah.
years. And I was like, wow.
I honestly still am kind of like, I can't believe we've done that.
It is a lot. It is a lot. So I'd love to unpack that today and kind of
Yeah,
get your advice on acquisitions and managing those from a marketing perspective, since
yeah.
you've got so much experience with that.
Yeah.
But before we get started, could you please tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, sure. So I worked at Rising, which is also a Wipro company, hence one of the acquisitions, for 6 or 7 years. I think 7 years finally. But I'm currently a regional customer marketing manager at S&P Global Commodity Insights. So I recently started a new role, just to change things up, try something new. Because I'd been at Rising for so long. I've been really lucky to work in the US, Canada, and now I'm based in the UK, despite my accent. And I've gotten the opportunity to support teams globally. So lots of different time zones, lots of different countries and ways of working, which is super interesting. All of my experience so far has been in the B2B tech and marketing side of things. And as you've said, most of that experience has been spent navigating growth through mergers and acquisitions at Rising and beyond, I suppose.
Yeah, awesome. And I'd love to talk about that kind of more global piece a bit later.
Yeah.
But before we get to that, just to kind of broaden the scope and kind of give a bit of a larger, more general overview of the acquisition strategy that was happening at Rising.
Yeah.
Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So when I started as an intern there in 2018 and I came on full time 2019. But when I started out, I think we were truly like a couple hundred people, maybe. Maybe it was like a couple thousand, and I just wasn't like fully aware of everything, but I'm pretty sure we were in the hundreds, which is still quite a lot for like, a smaller company. Um, and basically, over the course of the next 6, 7 years, we grew by acquisition. So the strategy was really around finding companies that were really similar in the SAP ecosystem. Maybe they had a similar audience, maybe they had complementary products or products or services, and they were just operating in different markets. So basically, we kind of found those partners. Culture fit was really important for that. So way of doing business and overall sort of philosophy on B2B transformation. And then from a marketing perspective, that really meant like integrating our brands under one umbrella, deciding how are we leading with things like who's doing what better, what does the visual identity look like, how are we reframing our message house, and in new markets as we obviously expanded, we had to make sure that we were addressing those audiences. So for instance, the company I started out was in Canada, but when we joined forces with a UK based company, there's overlap, but there are also nuances culturally in how you go to market with that. So the value proposition and positioning varied a little bit as well.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a really good overview. And we're going to dive into all of those points a little bit more. I'm quite fascinated by the idea of being kind of good at acquisitions. And of course, there are acquisition consultants that exist, and I'm not trying to kind of demean their roles or
Yeah.
anything. But from a marketing perspective, how do you think the acquisitions improved over time, got smoother? How did your perspective of them change over time?
Yeah, I love that you've said like how can someone be good at acquisitions? I think the answer is like you just can't. I truly don't think that anybody is. I think it just by nature is not a clean, smooth thing. Like you could be the best person at acquisitions ever, and you're still gonna have hiccups like throughout the process, and that's normal. Um, the way that I really like one of our leaders, like in the first go, he conceptualized it against one of these frameworks where I think it's quite a known framework about teamwork and team forming, where you go through different stages where you have forming, storming, norming, and performing. So that was really kind of an ethos for us as we went through this process. Pretty much every acquisition put us back through this cycle. And if you look up the framework, if you're like curious or nerdy, it really follows a bell curve. So first you come together as a team and you're like, who are you and what are you doing here kind of attitude. And then you get into the forming. Sorry, that's the forming. And then you get into the storming where you're kind of like, well, I think we do this a bit better. Well, I think we do this a bit better. And then you discover things about each other. And that's when you get into the norming where you're like, okay, yeah, maybe your CRM is a little bit better than ours, fine. And that's when you start to just take the best bits, and that's when it gets better. And then you get to performing where obviously as a team you're just doing better, you're in homeostasis, you know your processes, you have your templates, and everything's, theoretically running smoothly. So it's really normal and actually healthy to go through that forming storming phase. Like you literally have to, there's no way around it. But with every bell curve, what I think worked for us is you get this opportunity to completely reset things, and you can get rid of the things that are holding you back. And that's where you get your marketing strategy improvements and your operational improvements. So basically, with every bell curve, maybe you like, I'm very visual. So maybe you start here and you go through bell curve number one and you end up like a little bit higher here. And then acquisition number two, you're like, okay, we're going to go again. And then you go through bell curve number two, but you end up here. And when you do that, 4, 5, 6 times, you are going to end up way up here. So is the journey linear? Absolutely not. However, you do still collectively end up overall better. So your product marketing gets more defined, you have better processes, you have maybe a more robust CRM, and you have that clean slate every time, which you don't always get in the corporate world. It really makes you think about like what makes you special now, truly, and how does that make our customers sticky? And is there anything that we need to get rid of? Like, is there anything that's holding us back that we can either use this as a good justification to finally drop or to re-engineer? And you have to get to that point where you pause, like you pause everything and you assess with a depth and like a speed and an accuracy that you just wouldn't normally get to have in a corporate context unless you're going through this big sort of M&A.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, you've alluded to the nuance of each acquisition, and there's no one
Yeah.
size fits all. I philosophically can't stand one size fits all, but that framework sounds really good. It leaves enough flexibility for all the storms to hit, all of the
Yeah.
different forms to kind of come together. Um, but yeah, it's nice that you acknowledge that it can be a bumpy road, even in the best of times. But
Yeah.
yeah, as you say, the bell curve, even though it's still always going to be a bell curve, it gets better and better and better.
Yeah.
So let's figure out how it does. Um, Actually, the next question I have on my list is the mistakes that people make. So maybe we can take it from a negative perspective. Um,
Yeah.
what are the common missteps that people take when they enter an acquisition?
Yeah. No, I mean, there's a lot because it's like I said, it's not a natural process in a sense. Like it is quite a forced thing, but it's forced for the better, and I think that's where it ultimately leads to. So I suppose the mistakes, I would give them grace because they are all natural and very healthy reactions. Like if you don't react with these things, I am worried for you slightly. But the first one, which might seem obvious, is resistance. So, like I said, very natural because we don't like change. Our brains are not wired to change. Change is scary. But you kind of have to just go with the flow. Systems are changing, your brand visuals are changing, your messaging's changing. Maybe you were the person who wrote your company's tagline and you're really proud of it. And now someone's come in and they're like, nah, I don't really get it. And you're just like, what do you mean I don't get it? So, it can all be really unsettling, but uncertain and unsettling in this context, it does not, like, if you view it as bad, you're not gonna get through it. You need to view it as uncertain is not bad. Uncertain just means we all now have a blank canvas. We get to take what we love doing, which is marketing and creativity. We get to do it all over again. We are just going to probably be mixing the paints for a little bit, and we're going to figure out what colors we want to use, like still on the metaphor. So, clinging to the old way of doing things is basically like you're just setting yourself up for failure, and not even on like a company level, because like it's going to happen. So on a personal level, don't set yourself up for failure. There is literally no reality in which things are going to stay the same. And I think that's a really difficult thing to sort of accept. But the sooner that you can just internalize that, the better off you're going to be and the better you're going to be for your team. And, you know, you can be the person who's bringing that positivity. You can be that person who's keeping things light and making the best of it. And your team is going to really appreciate that. So stay flexible, go with the flow, try to find the little things that you know are gonna end up sticking through and lean into those early. So, for instance, like a big one for me was we know what CRM solution we're aiming towards ending up in. Our data might need a little bit of a tidy. There is no reality where we're not going to need clean data. Okay, let me take that on as something where I can lean into it. I can be sure of that direction amongst all the rest of the chaos. And I can actually try and make something really good out of it. Like I can say, I've completely audited our customers, or I was able to identify 30 new customers that we could use for case studies, like, or even getting a new unified template for case studies and just plugging in existing ones into a new template. It's those little acts that feel really big in that moment. And yeah, you basically just want to make the most of it. The second mistake is kind of along those lines, but your internal chaos will show externally. So it's really hard to kind of keep composed and manage your emotions and do what you need to do and focus on the positive. But just be really mindful of how that projects out into the market, how that projects into customer conversations. It's not about, leadership or whoever or marketing giving sales a script and saying, talk about this. It's about, again, being that light, bringing those exciting changes, and then letting your teams know what those are, how they benefit us, and how they benefit the customers, so that it's overall like everyone's feeling a little bit more optimistic about it. And the third mistake, which again, I love the data side of things, we always used to say garbage in, garbage out. And a little bit to expand on my previous point of like, you don't always get these moments in time where you can just do an overhaul and your activity is like pretty much quite literally paused to get all these systems in check. So it's a really, really special time to be able to get really deep into your data. Audit everything, restructure it, redefine your lead statuses, whatever you need to do. This is the time to do it. And if you don't do it, which is where the mistake comes in, you are now probably committing to moving forward with the wrong baseline. And you probably were operating with an imperfect baseline and not using the opportunity that you have to actually correct and get really sharp moving forward.
Awesome. Yeah, and I think the thing that underlines those three steps and something that we don't often talk about on the FINITE podcast is attitude, like, and
Yeah.
perspective, which kind of could be seen as quite fluffy, or I don't know, like we're motivational speakers right now, but it is true. And I love that quote,
Yeah.
your internal chaos is going to be seen externally.
Yeah.
So every person on that team needs to kind of, I mean, and it comes down to the leadership and their communication of explaining the positives,
Yeah.
explaining how this is going to work, building kind of a simple but quite comforting roadmap of how things are going to go, what's going to be staying, what's going to be going, and
Yeah.
setting those expectations internally as well. So thank you for outlining all of that.
Yeah.
Really
And
helpful.
yeah, they
Mhm.
also like, even on that point, it's not like someone woke up one morning and was like, I think we should do an acquisition just to shake things up. Like there is always, I'll say always, a positive intent behind it. And even though it feels chaotic, we need to just, yeah, to on that attitude side, like remember the positive intent, remember the end goal, and sort of keep your eyes on the prize on that, because it's really easy to get lost in the sauce. But when you take a step back and you look at it holistically, and even back to those bell curves, we're doing this so that we can go from here to here, and we'll get there. Like eventually you'll get there, kind of thing. So
Exactly. And marketing leadership would be fully aware of that.
yeah.
And so, yeah, kind of trusting their teams to understand that, I think would be really important.
Yeah.
Um, so kind of On that internal external link, I do kind of want to talk about the actual marketing side of
Yeah.
acquisitions outside of this very important team building, team structure, team adaptation, I guess, is the customer, and how they perceive this acquisition, maybe how it benefits them or could disadvantage them, a little bit of nerve seeing this brand that has been so strategically and so carefully cultivated by another marketer who's spent
Yeah.
years building familiarity and loyalty with this customer, how they perceive an acquisition and how you manage that side of things. How do you ensure that brands don't, one, lose their customers and also kind of lose their trust?
Yeah, and that's so important because, like, I don't know, I'm not a consultant in acquisition, but from a marketing perspective, I think your biggest KPI is customer retention and customer satisfaction, or like maintaining, if not improving your, levels by the end of it all. So super important point there. I think first and foremost, it's really important to take it slow. Like if it feels like you're taking it too slow, you're probably still going too fast. The last thing that you want to do is, especially if you're in B2B and you're, providing services and products and maintenance and everything, you don't want to interrupt or confuse the regularly scheduled programming of the customer, especially in the short term, because that's obviously when, to your point, Jody, when the customers are, emotions are a little bit heightened, they're a little bit uncertain with you. They may see something in the news about your acquisition, and maybe you're all excited about it, but they're just like, what does this mean for me? And customers are already going to be wondering what's going to be changing. So it's really important to, in the immediate and short term, don't give them any reason to further that worry. Don't give them a small hiccup. I mean, hiccups will always happen, obviously, like normally, but not in terms of red flags when they're already feeling uneasy about the acquisition. Taking that iterative approach over time, you don't want to change things like, okay, we're completely, here's a new logo and here's your new sales account manager, and you'll never see me again, bye bye. You don't want that kind of attitude. You don't want to be restructuring things. If there are structural changes that need to happen, make sure that their points of contact are pretty much the same across all touch points. So they may hear from the marketers that they work with to speak at events. You want them to be consistent with the salesperson and the account managers and the satisfaction team and all of these different people. It's never just a one-to-one relationship, right? It's a many of us to one customer relationship, and we all need to sort of take them through it, show them the little things, and show them how it ultimately is done for them. As people, we are very selfish, I guess is the best word. We're pretty self-centered and we like to think things about us. So you may be going through an acquisition and maybe you're really excited and you're like, yeah, our brand, we're redesigning our visuals and it's super cool and modern and exciting. I don't think that's where the customer really cares. I think they care about things like, because we have an entire team of expertise, we've now built that into our value proposition. So here's what we can tell you about how we're an even better partner to you. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about how we can make their prices go down, because all of those things, that is stemming from the new brand positioning, the new brand messaging, the value proposition. Those are the things that we should have worked on as marketers behind the scenes. And then we take those concepts and that's what we sprinkle out iteratively to the customers. So maybe we have an email communication that's supported by a sales conversation that marketing, prepared, saying, exciting, prices are going down, or we've bundled this new offering in, or whatever it is. And that's where you build excitement with the customers as opposed to fear. That's where they see, oh, this is changing to help me, not just changing to help their operations or whatever it is. And ultimately, the common denominator between any kind of communication with the customer is keeping it human. It is okay to keep, you know, conversations a little bit like, yeah, we don't exactly know where it's going, but we know that this is the direction and it's a really positive direction. It's not about keeping strict to corporate jargon off of a script and getting everyone to buy into that. It is still about keeping it human, not putting up a false reality, hearing them out and validating any concerns that they have, taking it back to your marketing team, taking it back to your product marketing team, letting them know about these things so that we can incorporate that iteratively and like agile and all those fun words into our plans and communications, and then keeping the whole process customer centric. Because in B2B, at the end of the day, all marketing is about the customer, right? And the customer experience, the customer satisfaction, and how that ultimately feeds back into the overall buying cycle and the marketing funnel.
Yeah, awesome. I think all of those points directly relate to that trust building,
Yeah.
um, and the value proposition, I guess, and making it known that it's going to be advantageous to them, not just another
Yeah.
revenue driver for the business
Exactly.
itself. Yeah, exactly. And that humanization aspect is something that I've been thinking about quite a lot lately, especially as we say with AI, with
Yeah.
chatty jeeps coming in the mix. It's just so temptingly easy to ask it to write an email
Yeah.
announcing the acquisition, when customers can see right through that. It is customer
Yeah.
centric in itself to make the effort to have this coming from a person who knows their
Yeah.
customer base and can talk person to person.
Yeah.
Um,
And
as you're
chances
saying,
are they're talking to other people too. Like, I mean, maybe it's a little bit gritty, but in these situations, like your competitors are watching as well. And they're seeing, are they, it's kind of like, I hate to use a sporty analogy, but it is like a sports game or like a football match where it's not always about outperforming your opponent. It's about finding that moment where like defense messed up and then you can sneak through and like make a goal. And that's what your competitors are looking for the chance to do. Where, you know, they'll kind of, they're approaching your customer anyways. They're always trying to win them over or win them back or whatever. And they can fuel a narrative. So it's important for you to also be like, they're, you know, they're just talking gibberish. They're not actually, you know, listen to me straight from the source. This is how it is and take it or leave it kind of thing.
yeah, definitely. And I think in some ways it can be easier to do that in B2B because you do often
Yeah.
have account managers and
Yeah.
sales managers who are speaking directly to these accounts. Do you have have you ever kind of enabled those people in your acquisition strategy to kind of talk the right language and share the right messaging? Is that part of it too?
Yeah, totally. And I think that's where like the marketing and sales relationship always comes into play super tightly. I've had a lot of discussions this year actually with a bunch of people in B2B, and it's interesting. It seems like there's a really wide breadth of how tight are you with your sales team kind of thing. But in if you're going through a change like this, it's really important to like work as a unit and you have your overlap, and then you obviously go off and maybe they're having the customer conversations but we're driving the messaging and whatnot. But I think it when you have those internal like brainstorming sessions or creative sessions to come up with that messaging and that positioning, I think you do need to get all of your customer facing stakeholders in that conversation, because your delivery team, you know, they're probably getting the most truthful feedback from your customer. Your sales team, obviously they're checking the pulse check of the customer, the sentiment, and like overall how are things. But unless you have visibility into both of those things, you can't really guide and test your messaging. So if you get that feedback, you can hear, okay, the customers are really struggling with, you know, this feature and they don't have a strong satisfaction because of that. Great. In our new merger, I can now, as a marketer, identify, well, one of the acquisition companies that we've taken on, they have a whole team that specializes in that feature. Maybe we need to tell the product people, okay, let's get more integrated there so that as a marketer, I can then create a message of like, do you usually struggle with this feature? A lot of our customers do. Here's what we can do to help. And then you enable your sales team on that. You know, you think of what are the common questions that the personas that use that feature are thinking about. And then you get that whole kind of summary on paper documented. You get everyone to agree. And that's when the enablement comes in. And I think when you have those sessions, it can also be really inspiring because those are the moments where you're like, yes. Yes, this is exactly where we bring value. Our competitor can't do this. And it's a win for marketing, it's a win for sales, it's a win for delivery, it's a win for product, and most importantly, it's a win for the customer. So that's kind of how you want to look at the whole process.
Yeah, definitely. And I think we can add that to the list of how you can actually be good at acquisitions, more
Yeah.
broadly speaking, is opportunity seeking, really. I think you've mentioned that
Yeah.
a lot on the episode so far. Just different ways and tactics that you can use to spot those opportunities to really elevate marketing and elevate the customer experience.
Yeah,
So
totally.
really cool. Now you did say something at the beginning that I did want to come back to, and I made a note about localization and
Yeah.
working in different markets and new markets, and expanding into those. Do you have any kind of tips for localization and from a team perspective or a marketing externally perspective?
Yeah. Um, it's a really cringe tagline because I think it's one of those like buzzwordy ones, but think global, act local. I think it really does work well when it comes to localization and marketing specifically. Um, in my opinion, it's really difficult to truly localize when you're expanding in new markets, especially if you're doing it really quickly and like in a lot of different countries and a lot of different languages and audiences and cultures and ways of working. So, for example, with us, we were originally a North American company, and one of the earlier acquisitions was expanding into Europe. So, from that perspective, is it realistic to have a website that's translated flawlessly, not by like Google Translate, in every single language and have every single handout and document perfectly translate? Like, probably not. And if we wanted to do that, it would be enormously expensive, and that is not the time to spend a lot of expense, I think, because there's a lot of things going on anyways. Where I think localized impact really makes a difference is in like the human moments. So the way that I sort of perceive localization as a strategy, or the way that I kind of implement it tactfully, is, are we doing a tactic one to one or one to many in terms of your audience? So if it's in the one to many's, like you're running an ad on LinkedIn and it's going out to possibly an audience of 300,000 people, obviously that's, one of us to many, many, many people, then you could probably get away with something more general. If you are going one to one at an event and the event is in Amsterdam, you probably are going to have to put in a little bit more investment in actually making, the signage a little bit more localized. And localized doesn't always mean just translate it. It also means like, is there a particular industry of your audience that is prominent in the Netherlands? Okay, why don't we use that imagery instead? So maybe you're using like nuclear, I don't know, in nuclear imagery if you're going to an event in France, and maybe you're using more, I don't know, a different kind of visual if you're going to the Netherlands or something like that. You also want to make sure when you have that customer experience that their experience is consistent across those touch points. So if you're localizing, try to have someone who's based in that, geography, or knows that language, or knows that culture, maybe even lived in that country for a little bit, just to try and make more of that consistency. So on the broad activities, yeah, maybe that customer saw an ad in English and that's okay and that's fine. But when they're on site, they're like, you know what? These people are actually here. They do actually understand my way of work. They understand the social, geographical, political, like economical context that I need to run my business in. And that makes me buy into you a little bit more and trust you.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess if you're expanding into those markets by through acquisitions, then you've kind of got the advantage of having localized knowledge in your
Yeah,
team all of a
exactly.
sudden. And so relying on that and really taking advantage and you like, yeah, depending on that to make an impact and trusting them that they know their markets, I guess. Have you
Yeah.
ever in one of your 6 acquisitions, have you ever had an acquisition that didn't have much marketing at all?
Yeah, I mean, our company was quite, distributed. So we had a lot of hubs globally, but we also had a lot of remote workers. So I think there were definitely some markets that we were targeting where we might not have had people on site, but we had people maybe in similar ish countries or geographies. So for instance, maybe we had, we might have people based in the Netherlands and there might have been an event in Denmark. Obviously, totally different cultures and countries and ways of working, but it's a little bit more similar than maybe bringing in someone from the UK. And that's where, maybe they don't have the full language skills, but they might have more commonality in even like travel or just personal things that are ultimately how we're building relationships at these events, right? So I think it's important to kind of upskill a little bit and just make sure your team knows exactly where they're going and a little bit of that context, because I think impressions really matter. Like for example, the where I started, we were in Quebec, and Quebec is a great example of a geography where they're really passionate and kind of strict on, their culture, their language. Like there are literally laws that are set out to protect having French written as well as English and like leading with French. But at the same time, you may have a lot of people, because it's North America, they're coming in and they're kind of trying to speak English. But if you're at, a conference in Quebec and you're showing up French or French speaking, you're going to have a significantly more positive experience, I think, at that event than if you showed up and you're like, hi, everybody. And, I think there's just those little preferences and those little nuances. So you have to do your due diligence on the culture, really.
Yeah, and I think, as you mentioned, Europe, that's kind of an interesting case study of that nuance and
Yeah.
understanding that, because somebody might just say, oh, it's European, but there could be over 50
No, huge
different meanings.
differences. Yeah. And again, it's those little things, like it's not always just about the language. I think that's the easy one, but it's like the visuals. It's, you know, if you're going to the UK, you're probably going to go to the pub after to have pub drinks with your colleagues or your customers, and it's a little bit more laid back. Whereas if you're in, I don't know, Paris, maybe you want to go for a dinner because food is really valued and they like a nice meal. So, or a glass of wine. And it's like those experiential things where localization can also happen.
Awesome. All right, so we're coming to the end of the episode now. I did want to ask one more question, and
Yeah.
it kind of relates to the theme of this episode, and how the hell do you make have a good acquisition given
Yeah.
given all of the different details and nuances that could happen? How do you measure the success of an acquisition? You've already mentioned retention. Is there anything else?
Yeah. No, I think retention is, first of all, the most important one. So just to even reiterate that one, if you want to get that success, you need to stay super close to your customer throughout the whole process. So now is the time to over communicate. Don't spam them, but over communicate. Ask them more questions. Watch your NPS, check in, check your retention signals, do your CSATs, all of that kind of nice stuff. But in terms of overall KPIs, I think upsell cross sell is a really good one. Maybe not in the short term, but in the medium long term, that's where you'll see the success. And I think that's where the marketing value prop and positioning and go to market plans are really going to come into play, because as marketers, your main job through this process is how are we bringing everyone together and finding the best bits that we can pitch to the market. So the better and more accurately you can do that, the more your upsell and cross sell pipeline that's marketing generated is ultimately going to become. And that's where those examples come into play, where I mentioned earlier, like you may have a customer or a cohort of customers that really struggle with a feature. And then as marketers, you've, talked to your stakeholders and you've identified, well, hey, we can actually take that and turn that into our differentiation as we go to market with them. And then maybe you do that and you roll that out, and now all of a sudden all these customers that all have this issue are upselling and cross-selling into that new feature or maybe those services. So I think that's a really interesting one to watch. Obviously it has a little bit of an overlap with sales, but most kind of B2B marketing teams I've spoken with before and worked with, you are kind of responsible for a ratio of that sales pipeline. So I think that's a great metric to watch. Um, the third metric I think is a really, really, really important one, is increased customer references. So, regardless of how you run your customer reference program, whether it's testimonials or getting more customer speakers, more people raising their hands saying they're willing to speak, or even just getting more case studies documented on your website or in, internal files, whatever it may be, I think having that number increase is both a quick win and a great expansion. Quick win because all of the different companies that you are acquiring or working together with, they probably have theirs. So if you're able to say we had 5, they had 5, we put them together into one template. Now we all have 10. It's kind of like you've all doubled your number essentially of what you can pull from. And I think the B2B teams really, really rely on that customer marketing sort of segment. And as well, the more of those that you can create from new audiences, maybe you're tasked with looking at the CRM of the acquired company and you're like, well, wait a minute, we've got 10 customers that are really happy, but we don't have a case study. Why don't we up that number? Why don't we get those rolling? So I think that's a really, really high value KPI to monitor. And then obviously you want to track social media engagement because the more you can retain there, that's just another sort of secondary pulse check of, okay, people are still engaged. People aren't just, clicking on follow or whatever it may be. But I wouldn't say that's the highest value one. It's just a nice pulse check to have.
Awesome. Yeah, I completely agree with all of those. Yeah, I think social media can be a really great understanding of brand sentiment almost, which can
Yeah.
be hard to measure quite typically. So
Yeah.
great to make that link. So thank you so much, Valeria, for coming on the show. It was lovely to hear from you. I'm sure our audience got so much from this episode.
Thanks. Yeah, I think I've really enjoyed being here, and just everyone needs to remember to stay positive, lean in, no small wins is a great mantra. And good luck if you're going through an acquisition. You'll make it okay.
Cool.